Vinny Bonsignore, kind enough to join me now, running around, I'm sure, over the news cycle the last couple of days has focused squarely on the Raiders and Carl Nassib. Were you as surprised as anybody, Vinny, to learn about Carl being gay?
Yeah, and I was talking to some fellow colleagues around the country, and you knew that eventually this day was going to come. It was inevitable. But obviously, you don't know which team, who is it going to be, when it's going to happen. But it certainly did on Monday, and surprise, I guess, yes, but no, it was bound to happen. It was really just a matter of who and when and what team.
So far, it seems like the NFL and also the Raiders have really hit the mark in terms of their response to this. The NFL in the past hasn't hit the mark, as it relates to Colin Kaepernick and some issues of social justice. But the statement that they issued immediately after Carl's, I think was exactly the right sentiment. Do you get the sense that this was something of a coordinated effort between Carl Nassib and the league? Not that there's anything sort of pre-planned or weird at play, but more just like making sure that the NFL is aligned with the strategy for making this kind of announcement?
That's a great question. And I actually think it was, I think what the reactions that we're seeing is everybody's genuine reaction. And I think that's the great takeaway from this, is that there was no real forewarning. I think, I don't know the exact timeline of when he informed his teammates or the organization, but I think there was at least some forewarning there. But I think everything else was just everyone's reaction, and I think that's the great takeaway from this. Not just for Carl, who obviously, as he said, he struggled for 15 years on how to do this, whether to do this, and so the love that he's getting on the other side of that statement, I'm sure is great for him, but also for anyone that's struggling to make that same decision. Now sees the overwhelming support that he's getting, and maybe it makes that decision for them a little bit easier. And I think that's really what was more behind him doing this publicly rather than privately, is to try to be an example and show that support that he ultimately got as a way to support anyone else that's struggling with this similar decision.
Yeah, wonderful to see the NFL match his donation to the Trevor Project as well, because they do such critical work. And I thought that was just, the classiest move on his part. I mean, you cover the league day to day, the Raiders specifically day to day. Fascinating to see his jersey sales absolutely skyrocket to the top. I mean, let's start with the fan base's potential reaction here, because locker rooms are diverse in belief and thought. At least that's been my experience in covering the league. And so I think it would be unfair to say that this is going to be something of a cakewalk. I think that this will be used by opposing teams. This will be used by opposing fan bases. But what is the jersey sales, the immediate sign of support in that particular area, tell you about what's going to happen when we start playing football games?
Well, I think what it, number one, says is I think there's way more support than negativity. And I'll have to be honest, I've gotten emails, I've gotten people hitting me up, on social media with not so positive a response to that. And you had to expect that, and I'm sure Carl expects it, the team expects it. Anyone who understands how things have worked and the lack of progress that has been made amongst certain people had to expect that. I think that I don't see that there's going to be any kind of an issue inside his locker room. I think that's going to be closely monitored, and I think the lead that Mark Davis, the owner, took, the organization has taken. Derek Carr came out with a statement yesterday. I think that's going to set the tone inside his locker room, and I've talked to players. I think there's just great support there for him. Will there be some people that are taken aback by it or have other feelings about it? Perhaps. You're talking about 90 football players on a team, but I think that part is going to be, there's going to be the team is going to keep a tight clamp on that, or put a tight clamp on that. And I feel like the NFL is also going to make sure, with whether it's said or implied or whatever the case might be, that there's lines on a football field in the heat of the moment that simply cannot be crossed. And if anyone does cross that, I think there's going to be some serious repercussions if anyone does that. And let's hope that nobody does. I think where you're probably going to see some of the ugly side is in the stands. I mean, I know you've been to games. I go to games. I hear some of the most ridiculous, just hateful things coming from fans. And I think we're seeing what happened in the NBA and some of the fans that have stepped over the line in those arenas. That's a fact of life. And I'm just hoping that, the league, each organization, stadiums around the country are going to be closely monitoring that end of it, so that no sort of hate or discrimination, no matter what the subject might be, is going to be tolerated. And I do feel like what's happened in basketball has raised some awareness of how fans are behaving right now and some of the lines that are being crossed. And I think that needs to be reined back in. And let's hope that you're not going to see much ugliness from fans, although you're probably going to have to expect that there will be some.
It's sad that you're getting that kind of feedback already from some fans who have a problem with this, but we live in a very polarized country right now, and not everybody is on the same page. And I think that I hope at least that you're right, that the majority of the locker room, at least internally, provides that support. I know you said you've spoken to a number of players, and seeing Derek Carr offer his support publicly, and most immediately having guys around the league like Saquon, Barkley, and Julian Edelman and J.J. Watt immediately step up. First, how important is it for that to be public, for other guys on opposing teams and also within his locker room to step up and say, hey, we support this, the NFL supports this, and that's how it's going to be?
Well, I remember back when Jason Collins, the former NBA player, came out, I think it was 2013, somewhere around there. Some of the first voices that you heard in support were people like Kobe Bryant, the hierarchy of the NBA. And if you remember, everything else got squashed after that. Once the leaders spoke up and said, hey, we embrace you, we support you, we congratulate you on your courage that you showed. There was nothing from that point on that I can remember. And maybe there was at various arenas, but it was whatever it was minimal. And I would expect that to be the same here. And it is important because, again, this isn't just, and I don't believe for Carl Nassib, but it's for people that are in a similar situation that might be struggling. And, the Trevor Project really sheds light and brings home when anyone asks, why is this an important deal? Well, just go look at those numbers, the suicide numbers of young adults in that community. And obviously there's anxiety, obviously there's pressure, obviously there's angst, obviously there's, uncertainty, confusion, and anything that we can do to make that a much easier journey, we should do. And hopefully this is a sign that we're ready to take a step in that direction. I'll also say this, the league gets younger and younger by the day. And, I know in my own life, I know in players' lives, your life, we have colleagues, friends, family members. We see that there's television shows with major characters that have that storyline, see it on commercials. So it's becoming more and more of an accepted and normal aspect of life that we all have a line to. And so I think that this younger generation of players understands it more than any generation that's come before it. So I think that makes it easier as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that was kind of my major takeaway, Vinny, was the part of the statement that resonated with me was the one that you first brought up, that he had been thinking about this, agonizing over this for a period of 15 years. And I thought about, how the league is a reflection or a mirror of society in some ways, and that these young players that are coming in are a little bit more progressive, some of them, and have been exposed to different things. And maybe that is, the reason why he felt so safe to do this, and that the league's going to kind of continue to grow and change as we continue to grow and change. And young people come in and, like you say, have been more exposed to and are more accepting of gay people in our society. And I don't know if you agree with this, but covering the league the way that I have over the last 10 years, not as a beat writer, but just as more of a generalist, and speaking with players and head coaches, a lot of times what they've confirmed to me is that for many, many years, decades, in fact, in the NFL, there really has been this undercurrent of Christian conservatism, right? Like the state of Texas, faith and football. And, I've been told stories over the course of my career in NFL locker rooms of guys praying together and all that sort of stuff. And I wonder, because you cover the league so much more closely than I do in the day-to-day, because young players are coming in, is that getting phased out, or do you still really have this sort of predominant conservative Christian undertone with many of the NFL locker rooms in the league?
I can't say that it's the most prevalent or it dominates it. I know with the Raiders, Derek Carr is a hugely devout Christian, which is why him coming out in support was so important. I felt, and so there is that element. There's no question about it. I wouldn't say it dominates locker rooms anymore. I don't sense that. Although there's still plenty of times after games where players from both sides, both teams get together for a quick prayer or fellowship right there on the field. So there still is that element, but I don't believe that it's something that is the dominating factor in locker rooms.
How do you think this is going to go for Carl Nassib once the season begins? Because part of why this is so significant, Michael Sam was such a trailblazer in so many ways, but you're talking about an active player, an active contributor who just got paid by the Raiders, who's going to be expected to contribute week in and week out. Do you think that this is going to be a storyline or a burden, so to speak, that he's going to have to carry for the majority of the season, or eventually, based on his play, will this storyline settle down a little bit and it will be, Carl Nassib sort of more the athlete than the public figure who's decided to take on this mission to help create a culture of acceptance?
I think we're going to get to that point where it becomes, less of a storyline. I think very interestingly, I think the offseason, it's going to be where it's probably talked about, written about most in terms of people coming to him, to talk to him and for interviews and that sort of thing. Once you get involved in the season, it's a very enclosed world. And especially now with how COVID-19 has reduced a lot of the access that we have to players. There's still no locker room access, and so it's very controlled at this moment. So I think that the team and the league will do a good job of, kind of insulating him and protecting him so that it doesn't become too overwhelming in terms of the requests and, people coming up to him all the time, because we don't have that ability right now as it is for any story that we're working on. So I think that, that's going to probably in a way help, as we bridge that gap between it being a big story and then it kind of, fizzling out and just becoming pretty normal. So in one way, this was probably the best time to do it, because there's some built-in access restrictions that are in place right now that are going to help separate him from however big this story becomes. It's going to be able to be controlled in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I didn't think about that there's not that sort of traditional open locker room scenario where he could potentially be cornered with 20 cameras and 20 more reporters on a day-to-day basis with COVID-19, and maybe that played into his decision somewhat. I'm not sure. But, before this, if people were Hard Knocks fans, they did get exposed a little bit to a funnier side of his personality, a more irreverent side. That clip of him being a financial educator has kind of lived on in Hard Knocks infamy. What kind of person is Carl Nassib in your experience?
Yeah, definitely a bit of a character, and in a good way. And what we saw of him on Hard Knocks a few years ago with the Cleveland Browns and the whole money thing, that still exists. We've asked him, in the times that we've talked to him about that for some tips, because he's pretty good with all of that. But I think. And beyond all that, watching him on the practice field, and I'm just recollecting now times just within these last 3 weeks where I was watching him specifically because he's an important part of that reserve group, on the defensive line, and just to see where he was physically and how he looked during the offseason, not knowing any of this. So in those observations, he fit in perfectly with his teammates. He seemed like a good friend to a lot of players. There was a lot of camaraderie, and I would expect that that's going to continue. But what's so important for him, and maybe this helps him by lifting this weight off of his shoulders, is that he could really focus now and in the world of football, be able to kind of deliver what he wasn't able to deliver last year for the Raiders, who expected more from him and need more from him this year. So it'll be interesting to see if this announcement kind of frees him up a little bit to be able to be the player that the Raiders need him to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll transition away from it now because I know I've kept you on the topic for too long already. But, just to kind of put a final point on it, based on the players that you've spoken with and your experience within the Raiders locker room and organization, you don't expect this to be an internal issue with the team for the most part moving forward heading into the season.
I don't. And, ultimately, and this is what's so beautiful about sports to me, is that ultimately you get judged, can you help or not? Are you going to be an asset or not? These guys want to win football games. The Raiders, not to say that them more than anybody, but there's a bitter taste in their mouth over these last few years. They want to break through. They want to be a playoff team. They don't want to suffer another second half collapse. They feel that they're close. And if Carl Nassib can give them 6 or 7 sacks, he's going to be as accepted as anybody else. I don't think there's any care whatsoever about anything else other than, hey, can you help us win football games, as it should be.
Just want to ask you one other thing before I let you go here. Derek Carr saying that he'd rather not play the game of football than get traded away from the Raiders. I thought was an interesting point to come out of the last couple of weeks. What was your reaction to that statement?
Well, I think that if he were to get traded, not to say that he's on the trading block or anything like that, or if his contract ran out and the Raiders opted not to re-sign him, I think Derek Carr will continue to go on and play in the NFL. He's as competitive as that gets, and I believe that to be the case. There's a little bit of context that's needed as it relates to that comment by Derek Carr. It literally came at the very end of a long answer, and to set it all up, we asked him, because of what's going on with Aaron Rodgers, because of what's going on with Deshaun Watson trying to get traded in Houston, because of what seemed to have been going on in Seattle with Russell Wilson, the question to him was, seeing these players being emboldened and empowered to maybe try to dictate their future of where they're playing. We see it in the NBA. We've seen it in other sports. Has it ever dawned on you to try to do the same thing? Has that thought ever crossed your mind? So that was the setup. It was, would you ever pull that card or play that card? And in his long answer, and it was probably over 2-3 minutes long, of explaining why he wouldn't. Number one, hey, I signed that contract. The way I grew up, you honor the contract. That's a message that I live by. It's a message that I want my sons and daughter to live by, to honor your commitment. Furthermore, he loves it with the Raiders. He loves playing here. And so as he kind of wound down that answer at the very end, he basically said, man, if I were to get traded, I don't know, I might just retire, So it was sort of the tail end of a long answer. And I think some perspective needed, because I think people sort of ran with that a little bit. Gotcha. And all that said, if he got traded, I think Derek Carr goes and plays forever, whatever team he gets traded to.
All right. Awesome, Vinny. Thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it so much.
You got it. Have a great day.
Thanks.